Today we are discussing The Chosen, directed by Dallas Jenkins. So this is Nathan.
This is Jason.
John?
Nick.
All right, and these are some buddies I rounded up together. I started a thing called Church in a Brewery, which is basically a spiritual discussion group. That's where I met Jason, and John and Nick are guys I knew from high school. So we all come from different views, different backgrounds. Some of us have church experience, some of us don't. So I thought it would be really cool just to get us together and to talk through this story like as if we were reviewing a movie. Just talk about, does it impact you and how, and what questions do you have, and what resonates with you, what doesn't, things like that. So we'll walk through the plot on this episode. I think it's cool that we're coming at it from different backgrounds, but this is a different type of discussion than, say, is this true or is this historical, things like that. I kind of put that away for a different conversation, and I'm just basically focusing on the story. So I wanted you guys to be able to be yourselves, share whatever it is that you think, whatever opinions you have, just make it an open discussion. And let's go ahead and do some individual introductions. I thought, since this is the Brewery Church podcast, we should all say, what kind of beer are we drinking, or what are we drinking here? I've got a Boulevard Steep Drop Nitro Cold Brew Milk Stout here. It's pretty good. Kind of threw me off for the first couple sips, but after I got used to it, I kind of like it. Oh, Jason, what do you got?
Oh, I'm still at work, so I'm just drinking some black tea.
Yeah.
Probably drink something afterwards at Wichita Brewing, to be honest with you. So.
Okay, cool. What about you, John?
I actually went with Scotch this evening. So I've got a very smoky Ardbeg, which is delicious. So
Awesome. Nick, you are our house brewer here on the podcast. What you got?
Well, it's halfway gone, but it is my homebrewed Doppelbock.
Oh, wow.
Classic German style, made for the second time. It's strong, but not too strong. Dark, but not too dark. It's very good.
Awesome. You're gonna have to send me some beer, man.
Hey, put it in the mail. I'll send it with John.
Yeah, I'm here in Kansas with Jason, and John and Nick are back in Indiana. They're in my hometown. So yeah, mail me some beer if that's even possible. Can you do that?
You can.
Oh, okay.
Surprisingly not illegal.
You're going to have to work on the beard, Nathan. All of us got beards. You're going to have to work a little harder on yours.
Beards? Dude,
Yeah.
I've got like the world's tiniest beard. I'm like the fifth grader who can't grow a beard. That's depressing. I'd make a terrible Viking. I thought since this is our first episode, we'd give a little background on what our individual perspectives are on the material. So I thought maybe we'd explain like our spiritual background, if we have one, kind of where we're coming from. So I'll go ahead and start with me. I actually grew up Methodist. I kind of come from like the rock and roll world, sort of. Played in church bands. I played in a lot of bars and bands and stuff like that. In my early 20s, I went to non-denominational Christian churches. I wrestled with a lot of doubts. I worked through that, but my faith is more based on kind of evidence. That was really important to me. So I consider myself a former skeptic, but I still have a lot of the same types of questions. I just feel like I've gotten some answers. So I am coming at this from the Christian perspective, but I haven't forgotten what it was like to be a skeptic. So that's kind of my background. What about you, Jason?
Well, I was raised actually as Mormon, believe it or not. And so I did seminary in the mornings and all that. I've actually been to a Baptist church. Right now, I typically don't go to church. Not that I'm opposed to religion. I'm probably going to be the most unreligious of the group, most likely. I do have some reservations. I got an academic background in geography and political science, so I tend to look at things at a really, really academic approach. And so to me, the evidence kind of has to add up. And so I'm not opposed to, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I kind of take a little bit different approach. I know in this area, it's kind of like they expect you just to, this is what it is, believe that it's just on faith. I kind of have issues with that. And sometimes I kind of have a negative view. I think sometimes, coming from my point, I think sometimes religion's used actually in a harmful way instead of a positive way. And so when I look at things, I kind of have that approach there when I look at things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I always like talking to you at the Brewery Church. So like that's this perspective that you have is actually part of the reason I really wanted you on this
Yeah, I know.
podcast. So I don't want you to feel like you have to hold back or anything. Like be yourself.
No, and I think that's good. I mean, when you meet talking with some of the other guys is, I mean, some of the conversations we talk about, I mean, I'm pretty laid back. I mean, people have their views, they have their views. I'm not trying to push my opinion on you guys. And I don't think you or the other guys are probably going to try to do that. We just have our views. And, you know, we talked about that before. I mean, sometimes people, I mean, just some of the conversations we had would be fighting words in some, you know, circles. And so I just don't think that's productive. And it's, you don't have to agree with people all the time. You can disagree and still have beer or whatever. I mean, it's
yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm. What about you, John?
Well, I grew up Christian, non-denominational. Pretty much did that through my 20s. At this point in my life, I would still consider myself Christian. However, I still question some things and have kind of explored some different viewpoints within Christianity itself to try to sort out answers to some of those questions. So.
Okay. What about you, Nick?
I am none of the above. I was not raised in a household that went to church. My dad only went to church because it was the only place that had air conditioning. So it's just not something I'm familiar with. But as I've gotten older and, you know, you read and, you know, I guess even in movies, you see literary references. So I felt like I've had to, or I've wanted to go out and educate myself so that way I don't miss some of these references, and particularly pop culture. You know, I can't think of a good one offhand, but you know, you sit there and your friends see it like, oh yeah, it's like I missed something. Did I miss something? But with my wife, we've been married 3.5 years now, I think. But she's very spiritual, very religious, and so I've started going to church with her. And you know, kind of like you, Jason, I'm very, very skeptical. I've got an engineering background, so I got to see it, I got to believe it, you got to trust it. So I'm not a cynic. That's not the right term, but I just have, I guess, like the rest of you, I have a lot of questions. But I'm open, and I'm wanting to learn, and that's why I'm here. So
that's cool.
Sorry, long-winded.
No, that's all right, man. So I consider myself to be pretty close to the material, and I kind of wanted to see what some other people maybe would see in this story who aren't as close to the material as I am. So I think that's really cool. Don't be afraid to speak up through this whole thing. I was reading the other day about the director, and he made some comments about the series. And he said basically he felt like his job was to get people together from all beliefs and even people who don't have any faith at all. Like that's who this series is for. He wanted to like not, you know, promote any particular denomination or, you know, viewpoint on Jesus or anything like that. He just wanted to try to explain who Jesus was and put some culture behind it. So there are some liberties taken creatively with this series, you know, to try to build story and perspective. He tries not to just make stuff up, but, you know, say something that would make value behind understanding the characters. But I thought it was kind of cool that like this is supposed to be for all viewpoints and things like that.
But it does at the beginning of the series. I can't remember the exact wording, but it says this is used as reference and encourages you to look up the scriptures.
Yeah.
What's he call it? A transliteration?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a big word. What's it mean?
I don't even know if it's a real word, honestly. I think it just means he translated the idea more so than the literal words. right? I
Okay,
think that's why we see some of the statements and sentences that are used. It's like, did they say that in this time frame? I guess has to be
Yeah.
80, obviously, but
It's kind of fiction, but in a historical context. So
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting that he said that statement. I mean, it was a big post on Facebook. Honestly, part of me was like, he probably took some heat, and that's why he made this post. So I thought that was interesting. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to watch every episode and make a podcast on each episode. So right now there's 8 episodes in season 1. So we're recording this podcast, analyzing episode 1. Then in 2 weeks, we'll do episode 2 and so on until we finish the series. So why don't we go ahead and dive in? I pulled a plot summary. I was writing my own and it was like way long. So Nick, you actually sent me a plot summary from pathos.com. And I thought, I'm just going to read that. And then I'll read my scene by scene breakdown and we'll talk about each scene. So, plot summary. Mary Magdalene is living in Capernaum and haunted by demons, both literal and figurative. When a man flees her home and calls her possessed, the Romans ask Nicodemus, a rabbi visiting from Jerusalem, to perform an exorcism on her, but it fails. Meanwhile, Simon and Andrew are worried that they will lose their fishing boat because they cannot pay their taxes. So Simon stalls for time by lying and telling the tax collector Matthew that he is secretly working for the Roman praetor. Did I say that word right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe so, yes.
Mary Magdalene considers throwing herself off a cliff, but holds back and goes to a pub, brewery church, where she is about to have a drink when Jesus shows up and reveals that he knows who she is. Now, I want to point out in that plot summary, they go ahead and use Mary's name as revealed at the end of the episode. For the entire episode, they're calling her Lilith. Yeah. And all of a sudden at the end, you realize that this character is actually Mary Magdalene. She's been living under a fake name. So why don't we go ahead scene by scene? The opening scene, it shows Lilith. She's haunted by demons. So she's a little girl. She's afraid. She's standing there with her dad. Her dad seems to be sick. And to help her with her fear, he has her recite the scripture. I think it's Isaiah 43. It basically says, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." And that's where the episode title comes from. So her reciting the scripture brings her comfort for a time. And then we see 28 years later, Mary wakes up from a nightmare and her hands are covered in blood. But this is kind of creepy. It's kind of like a horror movie at the beginning. And a guy's fleeing from her house, saying that she tried to kill him. And he says demons are inside her. So why don't we go ahead and just start talking about these first couple scenes? What are you guys' thoughts?
Okay, I kind of got a thought there. What do they call that word? Isogesis. And so you guys that know the scripture better than me, it's isogesis. We have these like the scripture says that Jonah was ate by a whale or by a fish, but we say a whale, or that the forbidden fruit was an apple when it doesn't. And so I get the view from this that they're trying to portray Mary Magdalene as a prostitute. I mean, she's in the bad part of town. I mean, the guy approaches her. I think that's not really scripturally accurate. I mean, it does say she's an adulteress. I mean, those are two different things, but it's really implying that kind of heavy. I don't know if you guys got that feel as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind
Agreed. Yeah.
I've been told that she's like a prostitute before, but now I'm in this phase, especially at brewery church, people ask these questions all the time. So like now I'm in this phase of looking everything up, and I really don't know like where that comes from necessarily. So I'm like you, I'd have to go look.
I think there's the church sometimes, in this case here, they get blamed for, they're really repressive on women. And so the time frame, they're kind of trying to mitigate women as much as possible. So it makes it look worse if she's a prostitute than an adulteress. And so, I mean, I was going to look that scripture up and kind of verify that. But
yeah. Yeah, aren't they both bad?
Yeah, no, but one's worse, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
I thought
cheating on your husband and versus, getting paid for sex. I mean, that's kind of two different things there. I mean,
potato.
yeah.
I thought so. Keeping in mind just that opening scene and knowing that I don't have the background. I thought she was like schizophrenic, and maybe that's not the right term, but just seeing things or just struggling with stuff that wasn't really there, which I mean we can attribute to later on, I guess, demons, but that's what I came across. And like, the blood, where in the world did that come from? Because the jump from her with the blood on her hands to the guy running away we end up seeing later with the blood on his head, it took me a second to try, and I feel like it was a big jump. I kind of missed it, but yeah, and it was an interesting opener.
It took me a while to figure out what was going on. Yeah,
Definitely. And
yeah.
I would agree in terms of trying to sort out the situation right from the start. I felt like the episode in general, at least for me, there was a constant battle in terms of where I was trying to be engaged in what was going on and what was being portrayed, and fighting off the liberties that were being taken. And I understand why they were being taken in terms of character and plot development, to try to portray the story and set the stage. But that was a constant struggle for me personally in terms of engagement with the episode. But yeah, the opening of it was it was interesting. So
yeah, it's definitely a hook. So you're kind of trying to figure out, like, okay, what is actually taken from scripture here and what is like a creative liberty, right? Like,
right.
Did she really try to kill somebody and stuff like that?
Right.
That's a pretty big accusation to like add on to somebody as a character.
Just a little bit, yeah. Attempted murder, I don't know. Again, I guess if we look at it from the aspect of sin is sin, it's not. But I don't know. That's I know I wouldn't want to be accused of that. So
yeah, I know they're probably not going to go here, but like, to me, an interesting discussion, like philosophically, is where is the line between like spiritual possession and mental illness, and
Yep.
are they connected? Because I would think they're related, but like, what's the difference? Where's the line? Things like that.
I would make the statement. I almost said argument, but I'd make the statement that you're going to encounter, if you're a person that works in this field, you're going to encounter people that are truly, mentally ill, right? You're going to encounter someone that's mentally ill and makes a claim they're possessed. And then I'd make the claim that you would encounter someone that claims they're possessed. And you can look at the facts and details around their, I'll say possession, if you will, air quotes. And there are instances where it's unexplainable. I don't know. Is Satan himself inside of a person and they got cast out by a priest? I don't know. But sometimes people change and it's tough to explain. So the line exists, but like you said, it is flirted with. And was Mary Magdalene in this episode mentally ill, or was she possessed, or was she all the above?
What would the people at that? I mean, at that time frame. I mean, for us in our modern, we can kind of see the difference. If you look at through history, they're not going to see a difference. If you got a mental problem, they're probably going to say you're possessed. I mean, they're banishing lepers because they think they did something wrong to made against God. So, I mean, they're going to classify somebody schizophrenia as a possession, most likely. I mean, I might be wrong, but I'm just going to assume that's probably how they would look at it.
Or crazy or something.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I guess I should definitely clarify that I think like most mentally ill people are not possessed, but
uh-oh.
Just get that out of the way. Yeah.
Some hot water, right?
I mean, like I said, we know the difference now, but at that time frame, they probably didn't.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was a pretty good opening. As somebody in my early 20s, I watched a lot of scary movies, and I could see some shades of that as this episode unfolded. So the next scene, we are introduced to Nicodemus, the religious leader. He's from a sect called the Pharisees, and he is stopped by Quintus. That was Quintus, right? I can't remember. Okay.
Yes.
So
That was Quentin.
he's stopped by Quintus, a Roman official who says he's a man of the people, and basically he wants Nicodemus to crack down on fishermen because they've been fishing on what's supposed to be the day of rest, Shabbat, which I guess that was a new term for me because it's really Sabbath, right? That's the term we're familiar with. And basically, whatever they caught on the Sabbath, they were not reporting taxes on. So the Roman government is ticked. I think the Jewish temple was supposed to receive some kickback too, right? Because if you're a Jew, you're supposed to give 10% back to the temple. So they both have this commonality. They're not receiving the money they expect to receive from these guys fishing. Some say, well, the fishermen are just doing that because, I mean, they're very poor. They're just trying to feed their families. So the Romans and Nicodemus basically kind of make this alliance where he's pressured into going to stop this fishing on the Sabbath. It took me a while to catch what was going on here. I didn't actually figure out what was happening until like halfway through the episode. So, but it seemed like it was kind of a key plot point. Did you guys pick up on that?
Actually, I didn't catch it either. Like you said, what was going on until Quintus storms into the synagogue, and then Nicodemus says, "Hey, I addressed that. Why you keep bugging me?" or something to that effect. There, and I was like, "Oh, those guys are working together." And so, yeah, doesn't it? Don't you think it kind of shows a little bit of the corruption the Pharisees could have right already from the get go?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
Nicodemus he's aristocracy. Then here he is working with the bad guys, the Romans.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to crack down on these poor people trying to earn a living.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because he's sitting there like entertaining, and then all of a sudden, with this crowd that he's talking to, he flips into like shaming what they're doing, like shaming the fishermen. And so he turns from like, hey, I'm a fun entertainer telling some jokes to like almost kind of nasty.
Yeah, and doesn't he justifies
harsh.
it? He justifies it like that was already our law anyway, so I'm not really doing anything to help the Romans.
Yeah, it felt very much like a modern day politician, in my opinion, in terms of kind of like there's a layer of slime there that he just kind of was able to wiggle through. Where when the scene initially started, where the Romans approached him, you know, you almost are kind of a little bit on edge trying to figure out the situation. But then by the time he's dispersing this message back, it just feels very slimy.
It makes you wonder if the people he calls what he did was doing a performance, right, or show or whatever later on. Yeah. That took me until like I had to watch it later in the scene because he does that twice in the episode, right? It took me seeing that a couple of times actually, like, wow, that's what he's calling a performance. Again back to the, I don't know if corruption's the right term, but back to the fact that the church having kind of a entertainment, gotta razzle dazzle, keep you in the loop type of thing. But aside from that, though, when he's talking about the fishermen, what is it he says? It's not just the fact that they're doing it is wrong, but what they consume while they are doing it. So like, or the fishing is bad, but the fish that they're eating that they caught on that day is also bad. So it's like even adding another layer into it, like, well, even if you did it, you really shouldn't eat it and keep it.
More of a guilt by association type accusation there.
Now, I didn't totally understand this part. Is the reason they're saying this fish makes them unclean is because it was caught on a day when fishing is illegal? Because like this is the same fish that they normally eat, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's what I was getting the vibe there, is because it was a holy day, so nobody
blood
can
money.
see dirty.
You proved that I caught this fish on Sunday, and I won't eat it. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
But they're
I caught that one on Saturday.
Prove it. But there he is. He's already I mean, you see that even modern day Christianity. I mean, he's kind of using religion against the people to keep them in line.
Oh yeah.
So he,
It becomes even more clear later in the second entertainment scene, in the second dinner he attends.
yeah,
Now, when I watched the episode twice, like I knew where his character was headed. I knew he was going to start wrestling with performing, and I don't want to perform. And, you know, when he's saying performing, he's really talking about like teaching. So
Yeah.
when I watch it the second time, you can see that he's performing. And then when he starts to get serious about the fisherman thing, cracking down on them, it like slips out. Like he switches from performing to, okay, now I'm ticked.
Yeah.
scolding.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, so in the next scene, we're introduced to Matthew, the tax collector. So in some passages in the Bible, he's called Levi. And I love his intro because the first thing he does is step and poop, right? I didn't realize that's what happened the first time. And then which one of them says my favorite quote in the movie? "Pardon me, Mr. Public Anus." Like, I did not expect that.
That's the cart driver. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so he gets in this cart. This is basically a taxi, right? And he's hiding under a blanket in the back. And I assume like nobody wants to be seen with a tax collector. So that's why he has to hide under the blanket.
I don't think it's a formal taxi though. I think it's just a guy who normally takes his stuff into this market, and because I think that's at one point he says, I'm taking my trash or something. And he's like, but I guess that's what you are, the biggest pile of trash in the city or something.
Yeah, pile of dung.
Yeah, pile of dung. Yeah.
I don't know if it was necessarily nobody wanted to be seen with him as much as it was the impression I received was he's so hated.
Yeah.
That he was fearful for his life getting from point A to point B, knowing the neighborhoods and the areas he had to travel through.
That makes sense.
I mean, nobody likes to pay taxes.
No.
I was thinking. Yeah. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the way they portrayed it, that character, I just don't see a tax collector at that time frame being so weak and frail. That's just
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, where you're too scared to go out in public and
he's pretty
you're
smart.
hiding. So,
correct. Tell me this: is Zacchaeus also a tax collector? Because he was described as small. So I wonder if they borrowed his characteristics for Matthew.
It's a possibility, but yeah, I wouldn't have pictured Matthew being depicted in that way. And I do think that it was more of they were borrowing from other attributes, from other people, and applying them to that character in a more open-ended fashion than what I would have anticipated.
So you're saying if he's a tax collector, he better be lifting weights, right?
I mean, to protect himself, yeah.
He better not be a hobbit.
At least not someone who seems frail, weak, or easily intimidated. I would not anticipate somebody who goes out in those times forcing money out of people, knowing that you're going to be hated, to have that sort of persona about themselves.
Yeah, you better have an entourage of soldiers or something to protect you if you do.
I feel like though the portrayal of him reminds me of like more what I would call like a present day, like if there were a tax collector, like a bookie for a mob for present day. And what I mean by that is he reminds me of a highly functioning like Rain Man. Is it autism? I can't think of the term. Which it is, but if you look at him, he's got OCD. He locks the door twice. He's very particular about which set of clothes he puts on. He's got all of those different sets of sandals, right? He steps in the pile of dung, and sure, nobody wants to step in poop, but he was so it bothered him so much that he pulled out the extra set of sandals that he happened to have with him, because we all carry spare shoes, and takes it with him. And we see more of this later on in the episode. So yes, he's weak and frail, but I think he's he's portrayed as incredibly intelligent, possibly very, I think gullible might be the right word, which actually I guess it's true because we see it later. But I don't think we, in this instance, are supposed to underestimate his knowledge or his brains. I think he definitely has it. He's just different.
Yeah.
That's a good analysis that you put there about. I mean, I agree with you to some extent. I mean, the Romans are hiring him because he's clearly intellectual, and he, can keep the numbers and all that stuff in his head and all that. And so, yeah, that's a good point about the OCD. I didn't notice it until you mentioned it. And I was like, hey, actually, you're right. He's kind of that way.
I watched this twice and I missed that both times.
I mean, even the guy who hands him his satchel when he's leaving, his satchel and his coat and everything, it's perfectly wrapped, and he hands it to him. I mean, it's almost like he's on a schedule. And again, as we see later, when he shows up to his office with the guard, he's like, "You're late." Like,
yeah, he does say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm showing my hand a little bit, but I was impressed with all the character detail. Like, they spent time carving out who are these characters and developing them. And in a lot of biblical dramas, they don't do that necessarily. Well, a lot of the movies, they don't. So I thought it was cool that they brought some depth into the characters.
It makes it a little more believable.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Felt more like a Netflix series,
It actually promotes podcast.
Promotes talk about podcast. The character. Yeah. Okay, so I believe after this, Nicodemus went and visited some other rabbis, and he was going to talk about the illegal fishing and see what he could do about that. When these rabbis call him the teacher of teachers, so I felt like that's the moment that we find out his status is really high within the Jewish, scholarly community. Or I guess, yeah, I guess you'd call him a scholar, would you? Or just a religious leader that's got quite a bit of respected status. And a Roman soldier busts in, interrupts this meeting, and requests that does he really request, or does he force Nicodemus to go to the red light district, and drive this demon out of Lilith? He's not very happy.
Maybe you guys cut me on this one here, but why would the Romans give a shit? Or I guess, why would they care about this woman in the red light district? I was kind of lost on that one there.
Public menace, maybe? Or
to me, it seemed more like just trying to maintain or keep the peace in the area. She was causing such a disturbance. But I'm kind of in agreement in terms of, okay, in reality, would they really go and to the extent of fetching a religious leader to bring them in to calm the swell, or would they just handle it themselves in terms of shackles in a cage? Or
that's the kinder approach I think they would have taken with the shackles and cage. I think that would have been a little more brutal, but maybe there's a means to an end. Maybe they're trying to appease the locals and, like you said, keep the rest, or keep the peace. But it seems like a lot of effort for this lady when a Roman soldier could literally just fix it with his sword.
That is interesting because Rome was not particularly Jewish, right?
No, not at all.
They're not. They're either not religious or they're polytheistic.
Yeah,
gods.
They have multiple gods.
Yeah, they have ancestors and that type of stuff.
Yeah, so do they even respect Jews enough to have them go in there and deal with this problem and think that they could, do it in a satisfying manner? That's a good point.
Well, no, I mean, they even the questionableness, or I guess they're doubting, or what's the term? Disrespect. I can't get my words today. They're disrespecting of the Jewish faith as shown in the beginning when Quintus is talking to Nicodemus in the cart, and I forgot the exact phrase, but Nicodemus says something about my God, and he's like, "Oh yes, you're gods," and he even makes a hint that, like, okay, I don't respect your being, so I'm going to say it very sarcastically.
Mhm.
Well, even within the scene itself, we've already kind of alluded a little bit to this, but the Roman just kind of came in on this council meeting that they were hosting, where Nicodemus was teaching and giving some instruction, and just bursted in. They made comment about it, and the Roman soldier just kind of looked around the room and was like, "Yeah, I don't care. Like, you're coming with me." So, in terms of respect, it didn't really seem like there was much. It seemed more of a command that was given by someone else, or an effort to, appease the general public for fear out of, an uprising or outcry that may have resulted from handling that situation in another capacity.
Mhm.
Don't you guys think that there's a, I'm not reading into too much of this. There's a relationship there. I mean, the Romans need the Pharisees because they want to keep things in order. I mean, they don't want all these rebellions and stuff kind of happen that they have to put down. I mean, they can do it, but they really don't want to. But the flip side is the Pharisees also don't want to make the Romans mad because they kind of give them some leeway. As long as you guys are behaving, we leave you alone. So if there's a problem, we're going to come tell you, the Pharisees, fix this before we have to fix it type. So it's kind of like
Mhm.
a symbolic relationship, or I won't say symbolic, but
Symbiotic.
that's it. Symbiotic relationship. There is, it's a give and take.
Well, some, not all, but some of the Pharisees were, the ones that struggled with legalism. They were good at controlling people. So maybe this was delegating?
Well, and this could also play back into the initial scene and with regards to the taxation, in terms of, that relationship playing out in more aspects than just the taxes that Rome was due, where they played a greater role, and it also facilitated some of at least from the Pharisees' standpoint, their kickbacks that they received, but it also substantiated their power to the general population that, look, the Romans are coming to us for help. They can't even save you in this situation. I don't know. It seems like a more complex relationship than what's on the surface.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that it's an uneasy alliance because they kind of have similar goals, but yeah. Well, after any more thoughts on that scene? No? After that, we go back to Matthew, who is kicked out of this, grocery cart that he's being transported in because, again, they don't want to be seen with him. And next, we're introduced to Simon and Andrew. What did you guys think about these characters?
I mean, just not knowing the background. So again, I'm just watching this show the first time through for what it is. It's just a television show, if you will. They're fighting. One of them's getting pummeled, and he keeps looking up, and he's like, "Oh, I can only take two," and then he shakes his head, "One more punch," and you see that kind of play out. At that point, I think they're trying to show that these guys are kind of swindlers, they're cheats or hustlers, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's having no background, not knowing who any of these people become. So
Yeah, I think you're right because they're referred to like sailors in the Bible are referred to as like foul-mouthed and stuff. So I was like, oh, if this is historically accurate, they'd be swearing up a storm. This would be R-rated.
Yep.
Kind of like sailors today.
I did like these characters though. They're kind of, I don't know, reckless like me and John in high school.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, they both seem knowledgeable. It's just one seems a bit more practical in his approach.
Mm-hmm.
The one guy who we find out later is more of the swindler than the other. Ultimately, they're both trying to do the same thing, trying to make a living, keep themselves out of trouble, keep keep their wives. I think one's married. I don't remember about the other. I think they're both married. I don't remember. So we find out they're decent, good, intending human beings, but yeah, at the time when we first see them, they're not good.
Swindlers. One of them is riskier than the other. What are you gonna say, Jason?
So I think I kind of agree. I think we kind of look at what we think swindlers, but as we kind of goes on, I think they're just poor, just trying to play the system. I mean, they're just doing the best they can, to take care of themselves.
Absolutely.
I definitely agree. And it kind of seemed to me like there were some liberties taken, which is understandable in terms of character development, which was extremely entertaining. I thought, the contrast between the two was great. But the end impression I received from both of them were they were a team trying to get through the day to get to the next day just to get by, because times were tough, and they were going to do what they needed to do to make that happen. But like you said, one was a little more risk adverse than the other. So.
Yeah, so in this scene, it looks like Simon's trying to fight his brother-in-law to make some money. People must have been betting on this. Like, why? I wonder, like, why is he fighting his own brother-in-law? It's fun.
Because he's willing to fight him. I don't know.
Maybe.
And he makes it seem like it's happened before.
Yeah, that does.
Right.
Yeah. like it's a normal occurrence.
Like almost a weekly thing. Yeah.
Have they played this game with you before, where you think he's down and he gets up and knocks you out? Is that why the other bigger brother-in-law or whatever he is shows up and ends it? Is they finally realize after they do this multiple times that they're getting hustled?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, John, we wrestled people in cross country, didn't we? Like, I wrestled James at cross country meets. It's just something guys do. Do you know who Glenn Robinson is, the basketball player from the 90s? Super famous. So he couldn't play, I don't know if it was the Elite Eight or the Final Four. I think it was the Elite Eight. He missed the game because he was wrestling one of his buddies in the locker room and hurt his back. And he missed like the Elite Eight in the NCAA tournament. I'm like, come on, man. So as a Purdue fan, that kind of, killed me.
Yeah, of course.
But stuff like that made me think, okay, so yeah, it's his brother-in-law. This seems kind of crazy, but I don't know, young guys, it's kind of realistic, and I go with it because it's fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but did you go with the line, that's why they call me wine hands, because of what I do to your liver?
I don't think that's the nickname I'd roll with, but that's okay.
Well, in all fairness, they do make fun of him for that later in the episode.
That's why they call me Twinkle Toes. Yeah, Jesus.
So after this, that's when Andrew and Simon start talking about tax days coming up. And they reveal that they've got to make some money quick because they might lose their fishing boat. And if they lose that, then they feel like they're ruined. So Simon is getting ready to go, push the boat out to go fish on the Sabbath, catch some more illegal fish that you don't have to pay taxes on. That's not too much different than like, I don't know, taking a job like mowing somebody's yard and making money and not reporting the money on taxes. They say the Pharisees make an exception for fishing on the Sabbath if lives are at stake. So these guys must think the situation's pretty critical, or at least Simon, because he says their lives will be at stake if they don't pay their taxes. And Andrew says nobody's lives are at stake. So they're sort of on different wavelengths here.
That's assuming that Andrew and Simon believe the rhetoric from the Pharisees. I mean, sometimes we just get the idea that all these Jewish people are just following the church. I don't think sometimes that's the case. I think you're just trying to live in the system and the laws that are already put there, even though you disagree with them.
Well, that's a good question. Like they're Jewish, but how serious about it are they? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, do they see that day as a Sabbath or not? I mean, are they practicing the religion or not? I mean, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think a good point along that line of thought is Simon's wife is the one that's like, hey, you need to go get cleaned up. You need to go to synagogue, where you can tell he's kind of like, hey, I spent the whole night out here fishing. I kind of just want to lay down for a minute, but if you say so, honey.
Oh.
Like,
Yeah, I saw the camera linger on his face after that, and I wasn't sure what that meant.
I mean, it's clear she's more, I guess, devout. Is that the right term? Than he is.
Maybe she centers him. So I did think it was interesting when they were talking about the exception. So they said the Pharisees make an exception, right? So, well, here was my question. Okay, whose rules are these? Like, are these the laws of the religious leaders? Are these God's laws? Because they're talking like the exception comes from the Pharisees, right? Why are they talking about the Pharisees that way? Why doesn't this exception come from God? Like God will understand. Instead, it's, well, the Pharisees will allow it, like they're the police or something. I mean, that's kind of putting the religious leaders in a much different position than maybe we do in modern day. What do you think about that?
I mean, for me, that this plays into kind of the source of a lot of my questions with religion. I mean, you have man's law and you have God's law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, God's law is obvious. You got the 10 Commandments, right? And items and such. And then you got man's law, don't drink and drive, don't stealing's God's law. Regardless, the point is, if we're going to pick and choose, and are we really following God's rules? Or God, the way God intended? So, if I'm only following man's law and not God's law, am I truly devout, spiritual? It's a whole really interesting thing to me. I think if you get really black and white into it, in a sense of, if you don't follow the law, you're bad. Well, you can find yourself in hot water pretty quickly, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that's an awesome concept, because I think that's kind of where Nicodemus's character goes. So right here, we've kind of identified in their culture, there appears to be, there's God's law, there appears to be the Pharisees' laws, and the Roman laws, right? So it's like 3 sets of laws, and there's some overlap there, but there's some differences too.
Yep.
Oh, interesting stuff.
Doesn't the Pharisees have their own like police and that type of stuff, or is that just for the temples? That kind of, I might be mistaken, that kind of enforced some of these laws. Is that not correct? I mean,
I think the people kind of enforced them, or the Pharisees, but I didn't know of any separate entity that necessarily did that. Do you guys?
I don't know.
I don't recall.
Okay. Yeah, as far as I know, like when somebody broke one of those laws in the Old Testament, I think the punishment was just kind of administered by, the leaders of Israel, or the religious leaders or something. So I think they're kind of one and the same.
Yeah.
Somebody write in if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
What about, let's see. The next scene is a pretty big one. Nicodemus enters Lilith's house, and he tries to do this exorcism and the ritual, cast out the demon. Okay, he said a bunch of interesting terms in that caught my attention, like the Watchers. Okay, so that's probably going to float over a lot of people's heads, but I've been reading this book by Michael Heiser, and he's talking about like angels and other spirits and stuff, and like there's this term, the Watchers, that's kind of an obscure thing, so it like really stuck out to me. But basically Nicodemus tries to cast this demon out, and she's not going to have it. She speaks in this demonic voice. This is like a scene out of a horror movie, and she basically says, "You have no power here, teacher," and he leaves. He's scared. What do you think of this scene?
I tend to agree with you. I kind of had to pull my phone out and Google some stuff. He did have a mouthful of things, like you said, the Watchers, and you mentioned some other stuff. When you say Adonai or something, which I had to Google that, which is the ancient word for God. And I'm thinking, well, that's a lot of stuff. Why don't you just say God to begin with and cut back through some of it? And I think also from that scene, I get the feeling Nicodemus is a little bit arrogant, and so I think he gets kind of put in check right there in that instance.
Oh yeah, this messes with his head, it seems.
Because then later on, he's talking to his wife back home about kind of what happened, and so he's really thinking about it. And then he makes if you look at, he makes an excuse of why he couldn't cast out the demon.
Oh
Some
yeah.
things are just meant for God.
Oh, so I'm putting this together in my head right now. I just realized, okay, all of the terms that he says, like, he says Adonai, but then the Watchers are like these angels and like a council that God uses that appeared in Daniel. God kind of worked through these people. So basically, I think what he's saying is like all of God's army, all of the angels, and I command you in the name of like God and all of his army to leave this woman. So it's all of the power that he can muster up, every spiritual being that God's created, he tries to use all of them to cast this demon out, which I think is a big deal, because like if that doesn't work, then he has no recourse.
Let me come at this from a different angle. And later on when he's talking to his wife, she says, or maybe he says, leave the exorcisms to the people who do the exorcisms, right? And my thing is, again, two meanings here. One, was he out of his element? Is this not something he actually knows how to do? And he was just, hey, I was voluntold to do this, so I'm going at it, and I'm going to, give it the best chance that I've got. And or is he just playing a game? He's going to go attempt this. I mean, do we know if Lilith at this point, Mary, I guess, is she Jewish? Is she none of the above? So when the demon says you have no power here, is it because she's not a follower of the Jewish faith? So this Jewish leader has no power. And, he comes in arrogant, like you said, thinking he knows what he's doing, but also knowing that, like, he can't do this. He's outside of his element. So he's just kind of catering and pandering to these people. I don't know. His effort seems very haphazardly to me.
He does seem nervous. And yeah, that's a good point about Mary. I don't know a whole lot about her background, but I don't particularly see, well, I guess we see like her father was probably a Jew, but we don't necessarily see a whole lot of background on her other than she's got that one scripture. But I did find this odd. Okay, so if she's used that scripture for so long for comfort, why does she have to still read it on a piece of paper? So that made me wonder. I thought, okay, either she doesn't know it that well, so she's not really a practicing Jew. Maybe that fits with the prostitution angle. Or this is a device for the movie, because later she can rip that paper up and throw it away as a way to show the audience that she's abandoning this faith. She's in despair and it's not working anymore. So I couldn't figure out, is this some kind of symbolic literary device, or is she just not real serious about her faith? I don't know.
I don't think that it was necessarily that she wasn't serious about her faith, or by faith, I just mean belief. Given the scenes that follow, and again, her thought process standing on the cliff later on, but it definitely seemed like it was a liberty taken to promote an idea and provide a dramatic effect. this scene in particular was difficult for me to get through. I'll be honest. You guys all picked up on things that I just did not, which is interesting to hear your viewpoints on. And for me, the whole time I was like, I understand where the character development's going. However, I was struggling with, I don't remember this being part of the story that I read or the scripture, but I see where it's going. I see why we're doing this. I was struggling with that concept more going through this part in particular, where I missed so much that you guys brought out there. So it's interesting to hear.
That's all right. I mean, to be completely fair, like, I don't think Nicodemus ever tried to exorcise her in the Bible. Am I correct?
Yeah, I don't recall
remember
that part.
So I think that's just kind of a way to bring in his spiritual struggle. Like, he started
Right.
doubting, and that was their way to maybe bring that to the forefront.
Did you guys happen to notice just the name of her, Lilith? You know, Lilith, the name Lilith, that's ancient Greek culture, and even in the Bible is written, Lilith is she demon or possessed.
Oh, no, I didn't
I thought
catch
that was kind of interesting that they actually would use that term for her, and there she is, kind of possessed. I'm like, well, that's kind of. I went back and I can remember what it's in the scripture somewhere. I went back and kind of double checked and like, yeah, it's in the Bible, but it's also Greek mythology as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, that's interesting that all names, that's the name they use, and here she is possessed. And so it was kind of interesting.
Isn't that weird? Like, it sounds like the name of a flower, but it means she demon.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, I mean, it does. I mean, it does. I mean, there was a woman possessed. I can't remember. We could look it up later on. She was possessed in the Bible, and they had to put some. And then also, if you look at Greek mythology, there's also Lilith, the she demon, as well. And so it kind of makes me think that when he wrote the movie, he kind of had that. That can't just be a coincidence. I mean, it's kind of.
Ooh, yeah, I didn't know about the Greek name. That's interesting. That brings in a layer. So in the next scene, I thought this was almost a callback to Batman Begins. So she wakes up and she remembers her father's words. What do we do when we're scared? And I was thinking, Bruce, why do we fall? Like, all right, so this is like an origin story.
It's funny. I just watched that on Netflix last week.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of had a similar thought go through my mind when they did the flashback scene there.
Yeah, because think about it. They do it like 2 or 3 times throughout the movie, just like they do that scene after Bruce falls in the cave and his father comes picks him up. So I really wondered if he had that in his mind.
I thought it was a little bit harder to follow though with Batman. I was kind of
Absolutely.
like, what's going on here? And then I was like, oh, okay. And so it was like the transition wasn't that great.
It's so fast, right? There's so much detail and so little time. Like, to pack 4 storylines in here. The second time I watched it, I was like, is this really the second time I've seen this? Because it feels like the first.
You catch a lot of things when you watch it the second time, and you know, kind of from a general standpoint, you know, talking with John about this earlier, this episode put a lot of things together to try to develop the characters, and you know, I think because of that, it made it very slow, and I think that's why when I ended up watching it a second time, and actually I told John I watched it 2.5 times, when I watched it the full time, I was catching things I didn't before. Because the first time I'm watching it like you're watching a movie, it's like, all right, this is slow. This is super slow. You know, all right, cool. This crazy lady tore someone's ears up and they're bleeding. That's kind of interesting, right? Okay, this dude's trying to rip a demon out. All right, let's see. Okay, he failed. All right, well, now what? We're standing on a lake talking about fishing illegally. All right, right. So it was just so slow, but I mean, I'm glad I hung with it. I really am.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I completely agree that I felt like this episode in particular, it is really about plot and character development, setting the stage for something bigger to happen in the next episodes. I really got that impression. I personally found it challenging to get through it and stay engaged and focused throughout the entire episode. I found myself continually having to take breaks, pause it, just because it's like, okay, I need to process this for a moment before I move on to the next scene. But it definitely, the way it ended, the episode in particular has ended, it sets the stage for things to get exciting very quickly, I think. And at least that's what I'm anticipating going into the next one. I know we're not quite there yet, not to jump ahead, but.
No, that's good. That's good.
I kind of agree. I mean, you did shove a lot of information there in a short amount of time. And let's be honest, I mean, the acting wasn't that great. I think that didn't help out. I feel like I could have put on one of those costumes and done just as good. I mean, Nick, I think he was a legit actor, and so, but some of the other ones, I'm like, who are these people? I mean, did they get in like from the local theater? I mean, it's kind of, I think that's also made it kind of hard to follow as well. You have a lot of information getting crammed in and just not presented real great.
Maybe I'm comparing it to like other Christian films I've seen that like this was like light years beyond that. So I'm curious, like for you guys, tell me which actors did you think did well and which actors did you think were kind of like on the weaker side?
I personally enjoyed Simon and Andrew. I thought their dynamic made it entertaining and interesting. Again, there were definitely liberties taken with all of the characters, but those two in particular stuck out to me to where I could kind of buy into the story a little bit better with their acting in terms of, these are two normal guys that have very different personalities, but this is how I would anticipate them interacting in real life. Where, Nicodemus, I felt like his character may have been a little over the top at times. A lot of the others, I would agree, felt a little over the top at times, just in terms of the acting.
I think the tax collector.
Yeah.
Sorry. For me, it's the tax collector. He was the one who intrigued me the most. But it's because I caught those little nuances about him, right? The OCD, the 19 pairs of shoes. It wasn't 19, but the absurd numbers of shoes. It's everything about it was curious, even to the point of this will be verified with Quintus. Yeah, all right, man, we get it. It will be verified. All right, man, I get it. I don't know. He was just very committed, and maybe he was overacting. Maybe that's my terrible film criticism coming out. But I don't know. He just intrigued the world the hell out of me.
That's awesome.
I kind of think the character Lilith or Mary Magdalene, I think for as much as stress and stuff she was under, I think there would probably been a little bit more emotion, particularly when she's talking to the barkeep. The Romans, I don't think they're that nice of guys. I mean, the one guy bumps into him, he's like, "You dirty dog." I'm thinking, serious? He probably would have hit him with a club or something, and just kind of Quintus. When you look at history books, I mean, they're real aggressive, they're very arrogant. Even Quintus, the character, wasn't that aggressive and that arrogant. And so it was like you could have portrayed them a little bit more brutal, I guess. I mean, it just looked like, here you go, wear this Roman stuff and just walk around. And so it's kind of like when you get at church camp and you got one of the leaders there dressed up as a Roman. He's not really Roman, but he doesn't act like one either. And so I don't know. Maybe I'm just overanalyzing it a little bit. I do like that's with Simon and Andrew. I think that dynamic is probably the best of the show there.
So you wanted to see a rougher, like R-rated cut of this, right? Director's cut.
I'm kind of really stuck on like historical accuracy sometimes. I mean, just like every time I see a Roman dressed in red, I'm thinking, dude, they probably weren't dressed in red realistically, unless you were aristocracy. The color would probably be an off red or something like that.
Something bland, yeah.
And so I mean, this is the regular old common soldiers walking around the market. They're not going to be dressed that nice.
And you got to keep in mind the Romans. I mean, they think these people are the scum of the earth, right? These people are just dirtbags. I mean, let's keep in mind these are the same people who later think it's cool to put people up on crosses and like hang them there for a while, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that they're kind of just, no, you dirtbag, you bumped into me. Yeah, I don't think that's really
Scallywag.
Yeah, what do you call him? A scallywag. I don't think that's how that really played out. Like,
no, well, you said they're actually crucifying people even at that time period. I mean, they crucified thousands and thousands. I mean, it was. Yeah, I agree. It is. We're too polite.
That's interesting. I could tell that they were kind of like the authority, and you didn't want to mess with them, but they didn't show you that they were menacing.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so let's jump into Lilith's scene at the pub. So she goes to the pub. I think what's going on here, the bartender is a eunuch, and he gives her this drink. He seems to know her. He seems to care about her. So he gives her this drink that he thinks is going to help cure her. Maybe it's some kind of holistic thing. Am I correct that?
How do you know he's
kind of?
They call him a eunuch.
Did they?
Yeah.
I must have. Okay.
Yeah.
There's guys at the other end yelling, "Eunuch! Like, come, give us refills or something."
I had to turn subtitles on to catch it, but yeah.
Same.
So he gives her this drink, and she gives him that childhood doll that she had in the opening scene. And she says, "I don't need this anymore." And that like immediately alerted me, like, okay, she's suicidal. Like, this is her like plotting to jump off the cliff or something. She's pretty desperate.
I thought I might have missed it. I didn't think it was a special drink. I thought he just gave her beer because he said something like, "Keep drinking this until you feel better."
Yeah.
Giving her, I mean, does he want her to get drunk? I mean,
that's what I wonder. The feeling or it's not necessarily a vision or the hallucination, but the way she was after she drank that beer, was that like did God give her that type of experience? Or did the beer specifically do it? Meaning like God knew she was going to go to the edge here, and I guess you could claim he knew she wasn't going to jump. And so that's why he gave her the beer and the vision afterwards. I don't think it was wasn't like an LSD laced beer. I don't think.
I didn't know if it was beer or not, because later when she wants alcohol, he says, you don't want that. That's a distraction. That's not going to solve your problems. So I thought, like, is the first drink, what's that tea-like stuff that's real nasty to drink, or at least in my opinion? You know what I'm talking about? It's like, starts with a K. They started putting it in beer occasionally lately.
Like the fermented tea?
Yes.
Oh, kombucha.
Kombucha. Yeah. Kombucha. I wondered if it was that, or like, I mean, even kava, because other countries have stuff like kava.
It definitely seemed to have some sort of medicinal value to it. At least that's how it was portrayed. And I would agree with you. I had a similar impression of it, where it didn't seem like it was necessarily a primary alcoholic beverage in comparison to the later drink that was offered to her.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's hard to say what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I liked the eunuch character quite a bit. I thought he was cool. This also kind of reminded me of like a Cantina Star Wars scene.
Mm-hmm.
But so basically, he's in this situation that you sometimes get, like if you have like a mentally ill friend and you want to help, but you can't, like you can't solve their problems. And he says, "We stay here till hell comes and face it together." But like, that's a big statement. And she's in such a place of despair. Like, she doesn't even respond to it. Like, she says, "Not if you're my worst enemy." Like, she sees herself as like hell itself or something to another person. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of, yeah.
What about the next scene? I've been like, this is the most intriguing scene to me. Nicodemus talking to his wife, getting ready for his next dinner, and he's wrestling with what happened in the red district. Because he's basically dealing with some doubts, and he's saying, like, what if we're not seeing the whole picture? And she's not having any of it. She says, you do not have, questions. You have answers and stuff like that. What do you think?
There's that arrogance.
Uh-huh. I thought, what a nice supportive wife, right?
I questioned if that type of interaction actually occurred back in that time. Not to say by any means that a woman should not be strong and opinionated like that, but I'm just saying with reference to that period of time, especially in a religious setting like that, where he's the teacher of teachers, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if that interaction would have actually occurred, but hey, kudos to her for being supportive, right? Even if it was kind of.
Mm.
I actually tend to agree with Tim. I was going to say that. I mean, is that, again, different time frame? The ladies back then were kind of more to be seen, not heard. Is she really having this conversation? Is she challenging him without him backhand or whatever they do at that time frame? So, I mean, it's, I mean, I just question that she's standing up to him. That's just kind of based on what we see, how they treated women at that time frame. So, I mean,
I think that's a good point, because it was probably more likely that like a peer of his would say this. I could see that conversation happening with one of his peers in the religious community, but like for a wife to say that in that culture to her husband, I think you're right. I've heard if there's an accuracy issue with the series, it would be like they give the women a lot more freedom than they actually had in this culture, or in that culture. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because like it'd be awfully hard to connect modern
Yeah.
viewers to connect with the series if they had to watch like women kicked around and not have any rights. So I don't know that that's a bad change, but like maybe
Right.
if they had another rabbi have that conversation with him.
I'm not saying it should be kicked around the series. That's extreme, but I just,
Yeah.
I mean, you got Me Too movement calling you about your series there, but I just don't. I agree with Nick. I just don't think that conversation happened. I
Mhm.
don't think that she was challenging him and almost like she's hey, stop it, put him in his place.
Mhm.
I just don't think that was something that would have happened.
Do you think
I-
that was a mindset though of some religious leaders?
What do you mean?
Like for some of the, like there's like a mindset. I've been told that some of the older generations were taught like, you do not question your faith, you don't question the Bible. And like, you guys know me, like I've got a strong faith, but I'm like asking all kinds of crazy questions. So given how some people view like you can't ask questions about the Bible, I sort of maybe saw some of that into this conversation, and that made it a little bit realistic to me if you ignore the cultural situation.
Oh yeah, okay, I can see that.
You couldn't have that discussion be between the Pharisee and another rabbi, because I would believe if a Pharisee was being a blasphemer, right? I think that's more egregious than being a failed exorcist, right?
That's a good point.
That's big time. It's almost like saying the king shouldn't be the king, right?
Yeah.
It's an instant death penalty.
So my
Yeah, that's
rewrite doesn't work.
Yeah,
At the same time, aren't there examples of conversations that take place that are more on a personal level? Not to say that this scene was realistic. It wasn't. At the end of the day, it just wasn't realistic. But on a personal level, being able to have those conversations, either with oneself or with a trusted peer, I think there's definitely references that can be drawn on to reinforce that. to some extent. But in terms of what was publicly projected, it's very much you have to toe the line at all times. So I think that's a distinction to make there.
Okay, that's a good point. So if you guys didn't necessarily find that scene realistic, are you intrigued by the theme, like the debate there, like performing versus like calling teaching performing, calling religious teaching performing? What does that mean in a modern situation?
Is
I
that a
was
translation
seeing
issue?
a little bit. I almost feel like Nicodemus, just based on that scene, wasn't buying into the faith 100%. And so his wife had to kind of correct him. I know that's kind of what I got out of that, of what you guys got. And he more or less later on makes an excuse of why he couldn't. So he's trying to, I guess, save face. So he's trying to, he says this demon was so horrible that only God can do it, and God wasn't here. And so I just get to feel like he's had some reservations, so he's just not buying in all together.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that even in modern times, we struggle with in particular, just in day-to-day life, in terms of combating what our personal beliefs are with things that we may see, or how we interact with something and how that may be in conflict at times. That's kind of what I gathered from that is, he has the staunch persona that has to be presented to the public, yet he just came face to face with something that seemed contradictory to what he should have been able to handle or cope with.
Yeah, I think that's good. I feel like he's rattled, and I expected in the next scene at the dinner, I thought some of the doubt was going to come out, and he doesn't let it out. He just defaults back to what he always teaches. But it's ironic, the things that he's saying, because he says, like, we know that if you follow, we know that God lives through you if you follow the law. Like, they picked that scripture on purpose, I think, because I think he's starting to wrestle with whether or not, like, that's always true, or whether or not he's done something wrong, so he's in bad standing with God, so he couldn't drive the demon out, or like that's got to be a thread they're going to follow up on.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, we see Lily at the cliff. She throws off the torn up scripture. So I would almost say maybe that's symbolic of her, like, abandoning what she's believed because it's not helping. So we see that. Did you read into that at all?
Didn't know what it was at first. I really didn't know what she tore up. I was like, what is that?
Expired coupons.
Yeah. Are you throwing flowers off the cliff so that way when you fall, your death spot's decorated? I don't know. I'm having flashbacks to what's the movie? Midsommar. I don't know. It's an interesting, scary movie with the Attestube, the what's it called? The honorable suicide because you're too old. I almost wondered if that's where she was going. That's why she was decorating her death spot, because it was going to be an honorable. I know I'm reaching, but still, it's what came to my mind.
I was thinking she was kind of, obviously she was distraught. You could kind of tell she was giving up. I mean, she's going to commit suicide, so she's just giving up. Another thought, which I was a side thought, was, is that cliff big enough? I was like, that doesn't look like if you fall, it's going to kill you. I mean, it's going to bust you up real bad and feel like you should be dead, but
just going to be miserable. Yeah.
It doesn't look that far down, I was thinking. So
don't jump too far. You'll hit the water. Make sure you hit the rocks.
Yeah. And nobody reenact this to try to figure out if it's accurate.
Yes. We're not making fun of suicide either. Yes.
Yeah. We don't condone suicide. You may be watching this. Seek help.
Right.
What about? Go ahead.
Well, maybe you're stepping into that, but was this interaction where she was going to jump off a cliff? Was this in the Bible as a story?
Because I don't think so.
Okay,
No.
because so that happens, and then this bird shows up out of nowhere. Like
The
I
bird?
know what so that was that not a bird? Did I miss something?
I missed this detail.
I missed
Yeah.
that.
There was a dove. It kind of was portrayed as like a pigeon or a dove that showed up as kind of like that symbolism of,
Like
God's
hope or
presence to
Yeah.
Mhm.
back her down from that situation. But again, that whole scene for me was another tough point because it was a lot of liberty being taken for character development and plot development.
Almost too cliche, would you say?
Yeah.
Man. So I gotta ask, if you didn't see the dove, then why did you think she turned around from the cliff?
I had no idea. I was trying to figure out
She
why
was
she didn't
hungry.
jump.
Yeah.
Burger King.
And maybe I'm putting things together that are wrong, but I see her throwing this thing off the cliff. I'm wondering what in the world's that. She's kind of looking down, as Jason pointed out, is that really far enough? And then there's this bird. It's like, what the hell? And and she was following the bird. I'm like, is this like the squirrel from Up? Like, squirrel? Oh. And the bird just kind of brought her back from the cliff and into the bar.
You were probably right. You were probably onto something that that was supposed to symbolize like God was with her even before Jesus showed up, like trying to reach her or help her not hurt herself, That's my guess.
Help her to show her some hope in a time of need or a low point. Yeah.
That, and it kind of reminded me of, the birth of Christ, that story of the star in the sky that led the wise men to Christ, kind of that pathway or that symbolism of her being led back to the tavern for the final scene there. I don't know. It seemed a lot of liberty was taken, in my opinion.
Are you saying that Jesus says go to the brewery?
Yeah.
That's what I gathered from that scene. So
Brewery church.
There's
I'm
your
just
plug,
saying.
Nathan.
I guess so. I didn't notice like the issues with the acting or it being contrived, just because maybe it's because like in my personal experience, I've seen somebody get real desperate and mentally ill like close up, somebody I was really close to. So I don't know if it like channeled that for me, or what. But that subject, it doesn't take much for me to be like, whoa, that's uncomfortable,
Yeah. I don't know. You say liberties were taken there, but again, I'm watching this not knowing the history, so it's, and maybe that's part of why I missed the bad acting. Is not to say I knew it wasn't great acting, but because I was curious, I was intrigued. I'm trying to understand the story and try and see all the relationships. So maybe my mind's trying to put the puzzle pieces together, and through the act of the cogs grinding in my brain, I just miss the terrible acting.
Does it bother you that like liberties were taken like that, like she was thinking about suicide? Like if you know that the character in general in the Bible was desperate, like do some of these situations bother you? Like the attempted murder thing, I totally get, like, because at first I was like, I didn't connect that with Lilith. I was like, wait, is this a different scene? Is this connected to the lady in the house? But what about these other scenes? Like, do they bother you, or do they add to understanding how desperate she may have been?
Do
For
you
me
think
personally, go ahead.
Go ahead, John. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, for me personally, it distracted me from being able to take away what was trying to be conveyed the first time around. And that's not trying to make light of the situation or the desperation in any way, shape, or form at all. It was just a distraction for me, where I was more focused on one factor and couldn't see, the forest for the trees per se. To where giving it a second go, I can see what they're trying to do with it. I can see why it's there. I'm not discounting that in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, it was distracting for me in some ways.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm kind of looking at it as I don't think they wanted to make another Bible story, and so then they're trying to make a Bible story, but not really a Bible story, if that kind of makes sense. And so, I mean, they're kind of intrigue us, make us think about some of the scriptures and that stuff, but they don't want to be exactly like the multiple other hundreds of actually stories that have already been made that are more similar to what you read in the Bible. If that kind of makes sense. So, I mean, if you're trying to get this whole new audience, maybe.
I mean, it worked. I'm hooked. I mean, my plan for tonight. Yeah, we're running a little long, but my plan for tonight was watch episode 2 tonight. I mean, so I'm curious. You know, my wife watched it with me last night, and she was like, well, "Can we watch episode 2 tomorrow?" I was like, "Only because we're talking about episode 1 tomorrow night."
That's cool. Yeah, I get that. Like, you know, we've probably seen or heard this story in different variations, so they've got to throw some surprises at us. I'm okay with that because I don't know if I'd be as hooked if they just did exactly what was in the Bible necessarily. But yeah, I mean, I am also at the same time sitting here trying to remember like what's what's accurate, you know, what's not. I guess
Right.
that could be a good thing because like that makes me want to go read the story again to see. Um, I suppose you could argue that like in our minds we could blur some things together and that you know think some things happened that didn't, but I guess it doesn't bother me overall.
You know, one of
Yeah, like,
the
if you ever
go
watched
ahead.
if you ever watched the Walking Dead series, and if you guys watched that,
Mhm.
you know, it's not exactly like the comic book, but what happens is it's similar enough to where the diehard Walking Dead people, okay, and then they go back and look at the comic book to verify it. You're doing the same thing here with the Bible. The people that really know the scripture are going back and verifying, okay, that's not quite correct. But then you get this whole new crowd that doesn't have a clue, and so they're going back and looking at the scripture too to try to get the similarities. So you're kind of getting both groups kind of interests. I mean, that's kind of what they're trying to do there.
And that's a great analogy. And it's not to distract from the sense that there's not an interest there. It's that, again, from my perspective, I'm sitting here in my mind trying to figure this out and hash it out as it's portrayed and playing out on, and I'm watching it to where I'm missing things because I'm spending too much time internally trying to think back on, well, did that happen? How did this play out? That was more my distraction there.
Mhm. I can understand that, and I'll mention some similar thoughts when we get to the wrap up at the very end. So I think I can understand what you're saying. So let's try to breeze on to the end here. So in the next scene, we see Simon and Andrew. They're at the tax booth visiting the tax man. We find out their account is delinquent by 40 days. They owe 60% in penalties. They should be in jail. And Simon comes forward and says, oh, he doesn't know about Quintus's arrangement. And he says basically, they've made an arrangement with Quintus, the Roman, what do you call him? He's not exactly a soldier. What is he? Man of the
The
people?
magistrate.
Magistrate or something. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Roman magistrate. They've made this arrangement, which seems to be risky because if they're lying about this, they're in big trouble. Andrew doesn't know about it. And then we find them sitting at a pub or something talking about, you know, what happened there at the booth. And Simon reveals that he got caught fishing on the Sabbath by the Romans. And they made an arrangement where if he would be a snitch and like rat out other fishermen who were fishing on the Sabbath, I believe they would forgive his tax debt. Is that what you guys got out of that?
Yes,
Yeah.
he has to.
Yep.
And again, I had to watch this twice to figure it out. But they're not just like fishermen that he's ratting out there. He calls them merchants.
Oh,
But then he goes on. So he calls them merchants. So it makes me think they're not his fellow people. But then was it Andrew goes on to say, "But you're ratting on our fellow brethren. It's cursed." So I'm kind of confused who it is he's ratting on. Regardless, it's getting him out of hot water if it's factual, which I guess I'm confused on that front. Did he actually run into Quintus? I don't know.
In real
Is
life?
well, yeah, in real life, yeah. Is he lying to the tax collector and then lying to Andrew? I don't know. I'm
I think
confused.
I think this is also a creative liberty. I don't think that, as far as I know, that this didn't actually happen.
Well, no. I mean, so he lies to the tax man and
Mhm.
says that he had this discussion, and then he goes to the bar and reveals to Andrew that the story of how he ran into Quintus. Like, I'm saying, is he now lying to Andrew about this story, or is
I
this
didn't think so,
okay?
I
but
didn't get that either.
okay.
Okay,
But he has actually roped Andrew into this against his will, though, which is a
yep.
pretty shady thing to do because it could either cost him his life or land him in jail. So, thanks a lot, best friend, right?
It's what we're here for, right? It's what we do.
I guess.
I kind of get the view you talk about the merchants. I mean, I think the merchants are actually, they're Jewish as well. It's just that, and he mentions they're taking all the fish. And so then in his mind, I'm thinking, they're taking all the fish, they're going to try to resell it to us to make a profit, while they're starving me at the same time. And so then he doesn't have a problem, I guess, snitching them out to Quintus. I think he does have a deal with Quintus, the way it kind of leads into it.
Is it like reporting a corporation that's doing something nefarious?
Yeah,
Insider
it's like,
trading.
hey, Quintus is like, okay, we caught you, but you're going to be our snitch now. When other people, we'll let you go this time, but you got to tell us when other people do stuff. We'll let you go back out again Saturday, but if you see somebody else. And then if you look at, when it comes to taxes, the merchants are probably, no pun intended, a bigger fish to catch than
Yeah.
Simon.
Well, it's like when they use a little guy to try to get the bigger drug dealer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, so the final scene, we see Lily at the pub. She's really down. Her special drink didn't work. So she really wants to drink a bunch of beer or whiskey or something. And a stranger appears next to her and tells her that that drink isn't for her. She gets ticked off, says, "Leave me alone," rushes out. The stranger follows her, and he ends up calling her by her real name, which is revealed to be Mary Magdalene. The stranger quotes the exact same scripture that her father had taught her in the very first scene, Isaiah 43:1. Mary realizes that this man knows her. She's overwhelmed, and they hug as credits roll. What did you think of the final scene?
You just found out that the main character is actually not a ghost, and he's seeing ghosts. Like, this is straight up like signs or I see dead people. I think it was good in my mind. And this is obviously, I didn't know the story, so I missed it. I 100% missed it. Like, dude put her hands on hers. Like, this is not for you. It's like, all right, cool, man. Like, someone's moderating your consumption. And then she runs away, and I was like, well, okay. And lo and behold, oh man, it's Jesus. Whoa!
Oh,
Spoiler!
yeah.
Surprise! Yeah,
That's
was
awesome.
not ready.
Was it a, like, did this scene land with you, like, emotionally?
I mean, more than I think the rest of the episode. Absolutely. I mean, she's struggling. She's at her wits' end. She's already tried to commit herself and was saved by this random bird. And now God said, "Hey, this isn't for you." And he's almost like, I guess Jesus is like, I got you. You're one of mine. I can help you. And he grabs her head. And
That's cool.
I kind of felt like it was probably one of the better scenes out of the first episode, where you can kind of relate. She's just had a terrible day. She's just wanting a drink. She's, leave me alone. I just want to finish this. I don't want to talk to you. Don't want to hear what you have to say. And then even this guy can't leave her alone. And then, it just kind of sets the stage for things to get exciting in the next episode, I think.
Mhm.
we hope.
But definitely could connect with that whole, like, it's been a long day. Like, don't need to explain this. It's just been a long day, okay?
I don't think I had an emotional connection with it. I mean, I could see when she came out and he knew her name, she's like, how you know my real name? I'm like, that's Jesus. I mean, you can kind of tell kind of how it's setting up. I did like the way they portrayed Jesus. I mean, a lot of times these movies play him like this, still this real long European hair type look, and so I'm like, yeah, well, at least that's kind of accurate. I mean, he actually looks, like them, and so it was kind of interesting seeing. I do find it interesting. It starts off that he actually approaches her before he approaches any of the other guys. And so I mean, I don't know if it was because you kind of look at this whole debate whether Mary Magdalene was actually part of that group or not, or what her role was, and so it kind of goes back to kind of that, the old church kind of tries to mitigate the role of women, and here that's the first person he approaches.
That is really interesting. Yeah.
Now I've got to go read.
Me too. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, I'm gonna find the order of which he meets everyone. I like that.
And to your point, you're right. He because he comes to her, right? Yeah. I mean that's an even bigger point. Yeah. Man, that's a good point.
Yeah. I found the scene pretty moving, and even the second time I watch it, I had the same emotional reaction as I did the first time, which to me means it was pretty well done. I know how difficult it is to hang in there with somebody who's like that far gone mentally, and like it's going to take a toll on you. So I think maybe that's part of what I was seeing, like Jesus willing to reach out to her with where she's at. Like, you're kind of in for it, and for him to do that the way that he did, I think that really was moving to me.
Don't you think if you look at just the characters we know, Simon and Andrew, let's even use Matthew, you already see these guys have problems. I mean, they're struggling already, and so I'm assuming eventually the next one he's going to approach them as well, kind of when they're down and out. I mean, they need help, I guess, or they're looking for an out.
Yeah. So we've got more characters to discover, which I'm kind of hoping they'll introduce them not 4 at a time because it'll be easier to follow.
We got
But
a long ways to go.
there's going to be more. That's interesting.
Is this the part where I admit, I guess, dumbly, that yes, the show's called The Chosen? Yes, I knew it was a biblical show. Admittedly, I had no clue who these characters were, and it wasn't until after I spoke with John that I learned that it's because these are all disciples.
Oh, that's okay. Like, I mean, I wanted you on here because you're relatively new to this material. Like, that's nothing to be ashamed of, man.
Like talking to John, I was like, man, the tax collector. He's like, oh, Matthew. You calling him by such a real name? And he's like, dude, he's a disciple. I was like, all right.
Yeah, no.
Well, what else don't I know?
Well, I mean, if you don't know, that's, you just haven't encountered it yet,
Yeah, and it's driving me to go look and go understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be curious.
Probably the point of the series.
Absolutely.
Is now you're intrigued. Like, I'm gonna go. All these other guys know who the disciples are. Hell, Jason doesn't even go to church, and he knows who these guys are. So,
Yeah.
I gotta go.
Well, what I want to know from you at the end of this is, okay, so not having a ton of biblical background, is this show a good introductory to the story, or is it overloading? That's something I'll be curious to know from you as we go along.
Yeah, and then just from my experiences thus far with, diving into, I think I can count on hands and toes the number of times we've been to church now because of COVID, but it can be. Some of the best interactions I've had were when it was slow and it was broken down and we were examining small chunks. But there was I can think of one instance in particular where I was getting the fire hose of information, and it was really good discussion. I was learning a lot, but it was like, man, I'm sorry. There's only so much space in this brain and I can't delete all my homebrewing experience. So you gotta let me come back.
And which scene in particular was that was the most overloading?
Well, that was a personal reference, but for me in this episode, I mean, the most overloading and as a whole was the end. I mean, you said you watched the ending twice and you got that feeling both times. I got it both times. I mean, that hooked me. The music, everything, the acting was probably the best in that moment, and I'm hooked. He's walking out saying, you are mine. I choose you. She's like, oh my God. It was just a lot. And then he calls her Mary of Magdala. And I was like, oh man. Oh, I was like, I know someone. Like, I literally wanted to jump up and run around the house and be like, guys, I figured something out. I know something now.
That's awesome.
Except I asked,
curiosity, have you ever seen that what's that old, the Bible, the one they show on Thanksgiving that was made like 50 years ago?
Oh,
have you
yeah.
seen that show, Nick? He's looking like what's that, Charlton Heston or somebody, one of those
The
old
10 Commandments.
oh, the Ten Commandments.
I've seen
Yeah,
that.
it's like 4 hours long. And so
I've seen like the first hour. Yeah, the last 3 hours
actually,
are rough.
I mean, that actually has I think a pretty good depiction of the apostles and kind of what's going on. I mean, the movie's made like back in 55 or something, or way back.
Still a great film. Yeah.
They usually play it usually around Easter. You start seeing all over the TV stations. And
The second best Charlton Heston movie.
Believe it or not, they showed that
leaves.
to me in 6th grade at school. Probably wouldn't happen today.
no,
Mrs. Smith
No,
class.
Which teacher was that? Was that an Avon?
Yeah, Mrs. Smith at the Avon Intermediate School.
Wow. I was not in the cool kid classes.
You're cool in my book, man.
Thank you.
All right. Well, what about? Okay, so we're kind of into the final thoughts. So Nick, you've kind of shared that you're hooked at this point. What about you guys? By the end of the episode, were you hooked? Were you looking forward to the next episode, or were you like, oh no, 7 more episodes, get me out of here?
I'll go. So by the end of the episode, yes, I was on board with it. I'm looking forward to episode 2. I've been extremely critical of episode 1. I know I've talked a lot of trash about it, but I'm on board with the story. I want to see where it goes. I want to see how this kind of plays out. And I feel like episode 1 was a lot of build up to set the stage for bigger things to come later in the series. That was my final impression of it.
Okay, that's cool.
I wasn't like overly excited. I mean, I'm not like, oh wow, man, I gotta go see that. But I'm kind of a little bit. I'm interested. I mean, I want to see, based on the first one, like we talked about the liberties. You kind of follow the storyline. I can kind of see where they're going with the apostles and all that. I'm kind of interested just to see the second one, kind of where it goes and what direction they're going to take, or what liberties are going to kind of show. And so I'm kind of interested to kind of see how it plays out. I mean, who are they going to introduce? I mean, my thought is they're probably going to focus a little bit more on Simon and Andrew and probably Matthew, hopefully, before they start introducing more people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you said, here we go. We're going to introduce 4 more new people on top of the ones we have, and so we'll see. We'll see what happens. I just want to see what direction they're going to go on this and kind of how it plays out.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. I enjoyed it quite a bit more the second time, I think. Like it took, 2/3 of the episode for me to really get invested in the first one, because you are trying to put a lot together. Even I have Bible background, and I was still kind of trying to figure out what was going on, the whole tax plot. It did make sense once I got it, but it is like drinking from a fire hose. And it is a lot of characters at once to figure out. So I think it takes a couple viewings. I didn't know what I was getting into at first. I was hoping it would be something that anybody could watch. Because like, there's a Bible Netflix show. There's a lot of stuff designed for Christians. And I wanted them to tell the story in a way that anybody could watch it and enjoy it like a normal Netflix series. I think at the end of the day, I think they accomplished that. You just gotta get through that first half of the episode because it is a lot to process. So I'm looking forward to episode 2. I'm glad that you guys are intrigued. Yeah, so you'd recommend other people check this out so far?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would.
I think John explained
would.
it best when I was talking to him earlier. It's like Breaking Bad, the first, but think about it. He made a very good point. Go back and watch the first. I don't know if you've seen Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
I'm assuming. Okay, so knowing how the story progresses and how it ends, go back and watch episode 1. It's painful because you know what's going to happen. You know what's coming. You're like, I just don't want to deal with this. I want to get into the good stuff. So. But you have to have it. You can't understand the good stuff without the baseline. So I get it.
Yeah.
It's just
that's
we're
character
impatient.
development.
I actually watched two series of Breaking Bad. It wasn't for me. I wasn't following. I mean, the storyline was not there. I know everybody who talks about it, like, oh, it's amazing. You need to watch a couple more to get kind of invested. And I was like, yeah, I watched 2 of them, but I wasn't really feeling it. So
I probably got through 2 seasons and then, I kind of fell off too.
I mean, like all really incredibly long shows, I think it was 6 or 7 seasons. There's a dip, but the last 1.5 seasons, man, it's where it's at.
Okay.
A lot to get there, though.
Oh God.
Well, for this series, I was happy to see. I felt like it was like the quality of a good Netflix series. Like if they were going to make a drama on Vikings or something, I thought it was along those lines. Gets you into the historical period, and it gives you the benefit of it having so much detail is it is worth watching more than once. And there's stuff that you can discover again, like Easter eggs. So that's what I would recommend to viewers and listeners.
I wouldn't have put that that little biblical disclaimer at the beginning, though. This is meant to look up the scripture. I would have put that at the end to kind of leave some of the people that don't know.
Oh, the scene with
right at the beginning, it has a little disclaimer before it starts, and it says this is intended for, I can't remember the exact words, but more or less, as a reference for the scripture, more or less like they're wanting you to go back and look at the scripture.
That's a really great point. Yeah, I agree with you in terms of it could have been a shorter kind of setup there at the beginning and then more of a reinforcement at the end with direction on what the intent of this was.
Yeah, I could see that because when I started this episode, so I was watching with my girlfriend and then a girl who had never been to church before. And I was really hoping that this would be designed for her to follow. And for the first 5 minutes, I thought it was going to be like overly religious or traditional, right? And I'm like, oh, the world's got plenty of series like that. I want to see something different. And I feel like in hindsight, at least the first scene, you guys are talking about the disclaimer, right?
Yeah,
the first scene makes sense to me, but like I didn't know it ended up in a better place than where I thought it was going to end up at first. So I could see what you're saying.
Which I agree. I thought this was going to be real religious, like every other rest of them, but it wasn't to that. I mean, there was definitely, you can tell where they're going with it, but it wasn't like watching the 10 Commandments or any of that type of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fun. For listeners, we're planning on watching episode 2, and in 2 weeks, we're going to do another podcast. So look for a new podcast every 2 weeks until we complete the series. So go check out The Chosen episode 2 if you want to watch along with us, and we'll see you next time.